Welcome to New Mexico Black Rifle Operators Union. I'm your host, Sean. This weekend I pretty much think I'm going to do Monday through Wednesday with this podcast from now on. That's been what's been going on for about a month or so. It's just I've not seen the statistics that make it worth doing. It's always worth doing because I like getting on the mic and talking. What I wanted to start doing was something a little different. Again, I'm kind of burnt out on the political stance places right now because I don't see anything good coming from either side right now. On one side, we have someone who is backing the IRS agents that they're coming after you, has kept people in prison, innocent people, and also for chain gang work, basically, in California. On the other side, you have someone that just brings a circus no matter what they do, no matter where they go. They're just too much. And I'm kind of to that point where I'm done. I know who I'm going to vote for, probably be the Orange Man, just because there's no way I would vote for someone who's advocating for mandatory gun buybacks. So in that vein, I was looking at what would be different that we could talk about. And, I remember there's Guns and Ammo TV. There was a show called Gun Stories. And they got in deep in the weeds about certain types of guns, certain types of how the story of how the gun came to be. And I was thinking about that, and I'm like, yeah, I remember that, and I remember it sparking something inside of me that I wanted to learn more about, specifically the K98. If you don't know what that is, it's a German Mauser rifle. It's what the Germans used in World War II. Technically speaking, it's a user the Germans used in World War I, too. The K98, though, is a shorter version of it versus what was available in World War I. Also, the sights are different on a K98 versus the original one from World War II, or World War I. But I digress. One of the things that I've talked about is that history or that legacy of firearms. And what is so interesting about this is with Paul Mauser and his brother. These guys were gun designers, gun manufacturers, and they were inventors. And if you look at the Mauser bolt-action rifle, about the same time that Mauser started developing the modern iteration of the bolt-action rifle was about when you started seeing the needle guns that were actually first coming out with cartridges. And he perfected it. I mean, he made a version of the needle gun, I believe, and started working from there. And when I say he, I mean Paul Mauser. Started working towards making a reliable cartridge-fed bolt-action rifle because it was superior. Now, when I first saw my first K98, my dad had one. And I didn't realize it, but my dad said this back then, that it was the assault rifle of its day. And what my dad was talking about is it was literally a military rifle from the German army. And that if you had the stripper clips and the bayonet and everything else, you had the capability of perpetrating a war or executing a war, prosecuting a war, with the same equipment the Germans had in World War II. And that excited me because it was the fact that this was something that my dad had, and it was kind of cool. The cool factor of this was used in a war. That's it. There was no Nazism about this. There was none of that. It was the fact that my dad had this rifle that we can trace to the actual event of World War II, and in one of two fields that we're pretty sure it existed in. I own that rifle now, and it's now an 8mm .6, and it will never leave my family. And there's a lot of family provenance for this particular gun. But that conversation and that story from, I think his name was Joe Montaigne. He passed away a little bit ago. He used to do gun stories on a TV channel. And I remember them talking about the Mauser rifles. And my first Mauser rifle actually wasn't a K98. That was my dad's introduction to me of what a K98 or what a bolt-action rifle was. My first Mauser rifle that I personally owned was a Spanish 7mm Mauser. And it was a year, I think it's a 97 or a 96 versus a 98. Now, if you don't know this, K98, K97, or 97, 96, what I'm talking about is a year that the rifle was made. That's how the model actually it's 1898. The model 1898 Mauser came out. And 1897 was the year before it was the Mauser, the Spanish Mauser I had. Now, what's the difference between these rifles? A lot of it has to do with the bolt design. In the 98, there are 4 locking lugs with the bolt handle being one of them. There's 3 locking lugs, 2 on the front of the very beginning of the bolt face of the bolt, 1 by the bolt handle, and then the bolt handle itself to make 4 locking lugs for the K98. On the K90, or not the K93, the 1897, or the Spanish Mauser, there are only 3, and one of them is the actual bolt itself closing. And it was missing that mid locking lug, and then the ASSI, the actual back part of the bolt, was slightly elongated and a little narrower in width than the K98. Now, what that translates to is different features, different years, and different design features. The Mauser rifles, if you know how to take apart an K98, you can pretty much disassemble any modern bolt-action rifle and any of the previous generations of the Mauser rifle. This is interesting. You look at the Mauser stock for a K98, and you see this giant metal buckle or a metal circle in the center of the butt of the K98. And what's that for? That's for disassembly. Sorry, I had to blow my nose, so I had to stop for a second. What you do is you take apart the gun, or take apart the bolt, and you end up with 2 disparaging pieces. So with the Mauser rifle, if you flip the safety up to half safety, you can pull the bolt out of the gun. And if you're looking at the top of the gun, the bolt, on the left hand side, there's a button. Okay, on the underside of the back of the ASSI of the bolt, and that will allow you to unscrew the ASSI, the back end of the bolt, completely out of it. Now, I don't know. I'm trying to remember about the 1897. There may not be a button like there is on the K98, which is a safety lock to make sure that you can't just spin this out. Anyway, when you get it pulled out, you're going to get the bolt body itself, and you're going to end up with the ASSI attached to a firing pin with the spring attached to it. And there's a lot of tension underneath it. What that circle of the stock is made for is if you were to push that in that center of that circle, that bolt, that firing pin, it allows you to detension that spring or put enough tension on it to where you can spin the last part of the bolt ASSI off and then finish disassembling it, and with that long spring, as you gently let it out, let the tension off of it, you have disassembled the last pieces of the bolt. That's what that's for. Do you ever need to do that? Not really. That was something that you probably would have done back in the day, and if they were assembled in packing lube like Cosmoline, like they used to do to ship them from point A to point B, you'd probably clean it and really, really well back then and down to that level. So you would disassemble it that far. In today's provenance, what you're going to probably do is just disassemble it to where it's in 2 pieces, wipe it with a good cloth, and put a little bit of oil on the spring and the bolt, or the firing pin itself, in that channel so that it actually has a little bit of lubrication on the parts where it's going to interface with metal. So let's talk about this story. So the K98 comes out, and what happened in this, if you look at what and I'm jumping around a lot, so I apologize, guys. The K98 was an answer for request by the German army because they had their long rifle. Okay, the K9 or not the K98, the 1898 in its longest version was easily 10 inches longer, and that makes it for a very cumbersome but long, accurate rifle. And then when you start looking at World War II, right before it goes there, the Germans are looking for a handier, shorter rifle that is more capable to be used in different places, dismount from vehicles without having this giant, long rifle that they had in World War One. And Hitler was in love with that rifle from World War One. That's kind of why the Germans didn't get rid of the K98, is they had other guns on the drawing board, but Hitler said this will be the primary gun except for the MG42. Okay. There are different styles of Mauser rifles, as I was saying, different years of manufacture. But why the German one is so focused right here and right now is the sheer amount of them that we have access to after the war. And remember that it wasn't just German ones. It's Yugoslavian, it's Polish, it's Belgian. FN used to make Mausers. They were all conquered by the Nazis, and they were forced into making German K98s. So there's those little differences, like I want to say they're the Z41s or something like that. They're Yugo version of the K98. What you'll notice is the stock, especially specifically where the handguard is slightly different from those than it is the German ones. Same thing with the butt plate on the rifle itself. The Germans usually had one that cupped the whole back end of the butt to protect it, or they had a very thin, very thick metal one that if you hit it, it wouldn't allow the wood so much to chip, and that's kind of what they went away from because it was cheaper to use the one that kind of encompassed the whole back end of the gun. But I'm rambling. Why the K98 matters is because of what it did in history and the iterative trial that happened with Mauser. Mauser, when he made the Mauser rifle, that's what those different models were growing up, from 1896 to 1895, 1896, 1897, 1898. Each one of these had iterative improvements, whether it's safety, whether it's how the assay went together, whether it was safety like, when I say safety, like the extra locking lug of the K98. The idea is that it gave you a safer buffer for heavier cartridges or when cartridges fail. Remember in the 1800s when the smokeless powder was just now starting to come out, cartridges had a tendency to fail, and they had a tendency to be overpressured. And if they fail, that's bad on your gun, and that could possibly blow up and kill you. In fact, that's kind of how Paul Mauser lost an eye, making a rifle, a semi-automatic rifle, that didn't have enough locking surfaces and safeties involved in it, that it took his eye. Now, that has some repercussions for Paul Mauser in the design of German semi-automatic rifles later on. You look at the G41, okay, that's semi-automatic one. Look at that gas trap mess and all the other messy pieces that the German army was trying to get made because they were thinking wrongly about how to deploy a semi-automatic rifle in theater or how to do it in mass for their military. Look at the G43 where they started getting that right. Now, and they still got it wrong, mostly because they were at the end of the war and they couldn't support the war needs, their material needs. But you look at what the K98 did. 2 world wars. It fought in World War I, World War II. It lost both of them. But up until, we left Afghanistan, and we probably still can find them in Afghanistan, there are Mauser rifles that are still long in use in the Middle East and around the world because there were millions of this style rifle made, and the rifle was the Kalashnikov or the AR-15 of its day and was adopted by almost every military